This week on Merchants of Change, we've got Josh Richards. Josh played hockey at the U.S. Military Academy at West Point before becoming an Army Ranger. Today, he is the Senior Sales Manager at Cherry. Here he is, Josh Richards. I'm J.R. Butler, co-founder and CEO of The Shift Group, and you're listening to Merchants of Change. This is a podcast about transferring the skills and behaviors we acquire as athletes and military veterans into becoming a professional salesperson. Each week, we'll introduce you to a top performer who will help us understand how they became professional merchants of change. What's up, kid? Today on the show, we've got Josh Richards. Josh, thanks for being on the show.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, JR. Looking forward to it.
Excited. It's going to be an awesome convo. So just for context for new listeners, Merchants of Change is a show for new salespeople, people considering a career shift into sales. And we're finding that we also have a pretty good, decent audience of sales leaders. So our mission at Shift Group is to help elite athletes and military veterans become elite sales professionals. Simple mission. Our podcasts are typically our guests are typically former athletes or veterans who've found success in sales. We were just talking about this, but you're one of the rare guests that checks both of those boxes. And from a structure perspective, we kind of start with the sports and military career. We talk about the transition into civilian life. And then finally, we try to round it out with some lessons you've learned so far in sales and business. Sound like a good plan?
Yeah, sounds awesome. Let's do it.
I love it. So I got to go to hockey first because that's our shared love and passion. So when I kind of start with a broad question, when I have you recall some of your favorite memories of playing hockey, where does your mind drift off to?
For me, it goes back to just like the dream, the grind to try to play D1. Like going through the prep school ranks. I know you're a Cushing guy. I won't hold it against you, but I went to Berwick and then Phillips Exeter for my junior and senior year. So absolutely loved it there, when just kind of like wide-eyed, bushy-tailed, not knowing what was coming, and just kind of like trying to get that college scholarship. So I loved that. Loved the locker room, and then obviously like getting into West Point as well. The memories there with the teammates. Those are definitely the memories that I cherish.
Dude, the character building that you do from like 13 to 19 to like get that goal is like, it is unbelievable. Nobody's really ever said that, but it's so true looking back, and being in the driveway, push ups, sit ups, squats, shooting pucks, like just unreal. And quick comment on Exeter and Cushing. Listen, Cushing, not everybody can have the strong academic history that Cushing has, so I understand why you're jealous about that. So don't.
Cushing's a tough school to get into when it's locked,
Fair. You guys have presidents. We don't. We've got convicts. That's okay. So we talked about this before, and similar kind of decision process. It's a huge life-altering decision to end up at West Point. Tell me a little bit about what happened leading up to kind of your first days at West Point.
Yeah, huge decision for sure. I think like at the time, didn't even know how big of a decision it was because I was so focused on. I always had the dream of playing D1 hockey. That was my number one focus growing up. It's like why I went to prep school, why I did everything. But my dad was always big on education as well. Like, you're not going to play in the NHL. Like, you got to get good grades. You're probably going to end up at a school that requires you to be good at hockey, but smart also. So like, as I was talking to colleges, it was kind of the standard bubble guy, like had D1 interest, a lot of NESCAC interest, like, pretty much could have gone to any NESCAC. And then some of the D1 schools I was talking to weren't as good academically. And then West Point came along, and it was like number one school on the Forbes list that year. I hadn't heard much about it. But I was like, hey, this looks like an awesome school, D1 hockey. I'll figure out the Army thing later. Let's do it.
Oh, that little Army thing.
Yeah, exactly. So, and free education. So I was just like, this place seems awesome.
Yeah, and the campus. I mean, it's breathtaking. The campus is unbelievable.
Yeah,
walking through, and the history is unreal.
Yeah, the visit totally sold it. Loved the guys that were there that kind of took me around. Just perfect setup. And I'm like a structured routine guy. I kind of like the prep school grind of like wake up, school all day, practice, workout, homework. And I was like, I'm probably going to fit in pretty good here.
Some people like it. Some people need it. And the combination of those two will make sense how you kind of picked West Point. I'm someone who needed it, but someone who didn't like it back then. And that's ultimately what cost me the opportunity to go there. But, unbelievable. Yeah. Now, like looking back at, you talked about some of those guys that took you around. When you think of some of your favorite teammates from West Point, what are some of the traits and characteristics that your favorite guys share?
I think like one thing that's unique about West Point is like the upperclassmen really look out for you. Cause like when you're a freshman at West Point, you have a lot of like duties. You can't talk outside. You have to like cup your hands when you're walking, walk along the walls and buildings. So it's kind of like a grind of a year, and the upperclassmen really look out for you. They're making sure you're doing all right. Off the ice, they're, picking you up from class, walking you to the rink, just like chatting with you, because those are the only upperclassmen that you're allowed to talk to. And really, it's like all those guys did that. Like we had a really big senior class my freshman year, and they were all awesome. So I think just like that willingness to help the younger guys is kind of like built into the culture at West Point, and then you kind of take pride in that when you become an upperclassman as well. So that's probably the biggest trait.
Yeah. That the whole plebe thing really scared me on my visit. I was like, oh my God, like, so that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. There's like a micro culture in the team where it's not as like hardcore, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's nice. Like we loved away games, because you got to stay in a hotel and sleep under your covers. Like we sleep on top of our covers at West Point. You like put a blanket under your bed so you don't have to like remake your bed in the morning. So just the little things, man. Like, oh, we're staying in a hotel tonight. Break sheets, boys. Let's go. So
that's so funny. That's unreal. Yeah. How do you think your teammates would describe you from when you played hockey?
I think I would hope similar from the younger guys. Like definitely that I looked out for them. Big work ethic guy. Like I loved getting in extra reps in the gym before and after practice. So I think they'd all say I was. That I was a hard worker, and I had some on ice mentors and some off ice mentors that I loved. So I would say I think some would consider me a pretty good glue guy in the locker room as well.
I can relate to that. That's my claim to fame, chief culture officer. Now, getting into your Army career, this isn't in the notes, but I'm kind of curious. Like, how does it work? You graduate, you go right into service. Can you just talk about that process a little bit? I know we didn't prep for this, but I think it's powerful to understand that.
Yeah. So it starts your senior year. You put in preferences for your branch and for your post, and that's all based off class rank. And then there's a certain number of slots in each branch, and there's a certain number of slots at each duty station. And they just go down the list based off what you put in your preferences and then what your class rank was. So that's kind of like what dictates your first move in the Army. Like when you graduate, the first thing everybody does is go to their basic officer leadership course. So like whatever branch you go, it varies. Like I went infantry. So I went to Fort Benning, Georgia for my training. So that's kind of like what dictates it. You graduate, usually get like a couple weeks to a couple months off, and then kind of report to wherever you're doing your training for your branch. That lasts from like between 6 months and a year, and then you go to your first duty station after that.
I love it. Okay. And now you had a great career in the Army. What are some of the milestones that mark your time in the military?
Yeah, I think first milestone is like choosing the branch. That's like that's a huge thing. So, choosing to go infantry dictated my entire career from there. So I think that was a big milestone. Everybody told me it was the most like a locker room, like it's like a sports team. I always thought like infantry was varsity. It's like, it's the main effort. So if I'm going to do this thing, I might as well do it. So that was a big milestone, and then ended up going to Ranger Regiment. So kind of choosing to go that path as well. I was a Ranger officer for my last 3 years of my career in Savannah, Georgia.
That's we have a guy who works for us, Sean. He retired 22 years. He's a Green Beret, E9 Sergeant Major, but he shared his story on Ranger Regiment. So we know that that's no joke, man.
Awesome.
Now, I'm curious, like for guys like me who never served, athlete transition is one thing that I think I understand, personally. But can you talk a little bit about the transition from military life to civilian life and why that can be like really hard on veterans?
Yeah, I think the number one thing for me, which I still like kind of struggle with, honestly, is like the sense of purpose. Like, I always say like it was cool being like, hey, I'm an Army Ranger. I would get fined for saying this by my teammate, but it's cool to be like, hey, I'm an Army Ranger officer. Like that was awesome. And kind of try to find that sense of purpose. And everybody's telling you like, hey, find your purpose. Like if you find your purpose, you'll never work a day in your life, and you're kind of getting fed with that. And actually, I think it was one of the first posts I saw from you, which I love, which you were like, hey, when I was leaving Holy Cross, I was passionate about hockey and Busch Light. Like, you got to find a different purpose. It might not be necessarily like the work you're doing. So I think that's honestly it's like a switch that a lot of people need to learn. And like what I kind of figured out and what I'm learning is that the job itself doesn't necessarily have to be your purpose or your calling. But I think like a lot of people kind of struggle to do that because you identify as like, hey, I'm a Ranger NCO, I'm a Ranger officer. It's like a cool job. And then you're trying to figure out like, what am I going to do that kind of competes with that on paper,
Yeah, that's a hard gap to close. If I think people, for the most part, the mix up I see often is people tell you to follow your passion. And it's like, no, you don't follow your passion. You work for it. Like there's nobody in the world that's sitting in front of like 7th grade class being like, yeah, I can't wait to be an insurance salesman someday. But dude, I know dozens of buddies that sell insurance and are super passionate about it because it aligns to what they want to achieve in their life. Like you said, their purpose. So yeah, that's a good analogy. We struggle with this often. I did a post about it yesterday. Like Sean's a great example. He had to interview at 42 companies before he got a BDR job, an E9 Sergeant Major, Green Beret. Like it's ridiculous, preposterous. Yeah. How do you think business leaders in the private sector can do a better job helping make it easier or smoother for these veterans to transition?
I think sometimes it's a matter of like not taking the job rec that seriously. Like they don't have to meet every single qualification on paper. And for lack of a better term, like as a leader, be an athlete, like see what in their background compares to a trait that would bring value to your organization, and be able as a leader to kind of bridge that gap and hire for traits more so than specific experience. And I try to do that when I'm hiring as well. I'm much more, and thankfully like my company's like that as well. We try to find excellent people. So I would say like be looking at the person more so necessarily than like the piece of paper. I think that mindset is one thing. And then I think like there's a lot of great veteran resources out there. So not to plug Shift Group while you're on here, but resources like that, like just educating yourself that there are programs like that out there. I did a couple when I was getting out. I know there's like Hiring Our Heroes, like Career Skill Bridge, just kind of like as a leader being open to having those conversations. And I mean, it's kind of a no brainer because your talent pool just like expands massively.
Totally. Totally. Yeah, we're involved in the Skill Bridge program. It's awesome.
Yeah, nice.
DoD program that and I think sales leaders and leaders and business leaders in general doing that research, and like it's one thing to post Happy Veterans Day, right, and say you support the troops, but my big belief is if you want to support, hire them. Like they're gonna add, they're gonna upskill and create a new level of accountability in your organization from the jump. We've seen it dozens of times now.
Yeah, 100%.
So let's talk a little bit about your own transition out of service. Did you know like right away you were going to do a sales career when you finish? How did you land there?
Not right away. I think I was talking to a lot of mentors when I was getting out. I did a program called Alliance Careers, which kind of leads to some job offers. I did Breakline, which was a tech specific transition. So it was kind of like talking to a lot of people just about kind of what is out there. And then a lot of mentors recommended, like, if you want to be in a performance based industry, like a performance based role, like sales is for you. Like, I mean, I really did enjoy my time in the Army, but if you're a top performer in the Army, like that and $5 will get you a cup of coffee. Like,
Right.
Whereas sales, it's like, there's a leaderboard, there's a quota. If you do well, you're going to grow accordingly. You'll be compensated accordingly. And that I liked. So I was talking to a lot of sales orgs at the time.
Did any of those mentors mention the fact that like even if you don't stay in sales, the lessons you learn there, like I as an entrepreneur and somebody who started their own business, I find that what I learned as a BDR and an account executive and selling to Fortune 500 companies has served me so freaking well in every like aspect of my day to day. Did that come up at all, or was really more about like you can really kind of get compensated according to your effort and results?
It definitely came up. Yeah. I think I forget who told me, but there was some stat that was like 7 out of 10 CEOs started in sales.
Yep.
And it's just like a great way to expose yourself to all sides of the business. So that definitely came up as well.
Yeah, if you can't convince, motivate, and persuade people to take action, most jobs you're not going to be able to do someday.
Exactly. Yeah. So that definitely came up and was a perk as well, because I was like, I think I like sales, but I'm not 100% sure. But if there's the opportunity to pivot based off performance, and it's a good place to start, I kind of went full crash forecheck on the sales route.
I love it. Now, I'm sure you get these calls. If like an Army Ranger called you up and said, Josh, I'm out in 6 months. I'm thinking about going into sales. What kind of guidance are you giving them? Are there questions you're asking? Are there things you tell them to like almost not try to scare them, but like make sure they know about?
Yeah. Well, first I ask kind of like why. And it's like, if they talk to their buddy who's an enterprise account executive at Google who like closed a $10 million deal from a golf course, and that's why they want to do it, it's like, you got it. That's, it's probably not for you. Because a lot of people see that, the earning potential, they hear those stories. But that's like the edge case. How you got to know that it is a grind. It's a performance driven industry. And like, on it, like your first sales job, you're probably going to be on paper overqualified for. And like, I'm an example of that, not to like toot my own horn, but like I took a significant pay cut in my first job in the civilian sector because I started as SDR. So I came from like 4 deployments, Ranger, platoon leader, Ranger executive officer, overseeing, 160 people. And then my first job was an SDR. So I'm like, are you kind of willing to humble yourself to do this? So I would ask that as well. And then in terms of like resources, I would say like really, really think about the why, because you absolutely can create the lifestyle you want. You're just going to have to be willing to potentially take a step back to take 5 steps forward. And then definitely like start building your network, like start selling yourself now, take advantage of these resources, like Shift Group, for example. Take advantage of them, go through like some type of program where you learn the skills, of how to tell your story, how to get the claws sharp on like some of the basic skills, and
Yep.
and yeah, you can get your foot in the door at some of these companies that way.
Yeah, the comment you made there that resonates the most with me, because we see it a lot, especially in special operators, that if you can't be humble and like start over with that beginner's mindset, it's going to be really hard, right? If you're expecting to step into that Google Enterprise role with one account that you have a badge at and you show up to twice a week, like, guess what? That ain't happening. It's definitely not happening in this market.
Yeah.
We always use the analogy, like we work with a lot of like these transition foundations. And when we get these special operators, Sean always asks them, like, oh, would you bring LeBron James on a combat mission because he's a elite athlete? Yep. Of course you wouldn't. Like, yes, He has certain qualities that make him very unique and different. But if you don't kind of start from those fundamentals, you got to close that gap. And that's kind of what we're trying to do for those types of guys.
Love that analogy as well.
So you get to this dude, these folks, they have a good reason why, they're thinking about it the right way with a beginner's mindset. How are you coaching them when they think about, okay, what kind of company, what does a company look like that you feel like is a great place to start your career at?
I think that a lot depends on the person. I would probably start at like, a fast-paced growing startup where a lot is like ambiguity, constant change, monthly, quarterly quota changing, no development, no like formal. You're probably going to be trained by your manager and like a peer mentor. And a lot of it is kind of like drink it through a fire hose, trial by fire, or like an established company that like they're going to put you through a formal training program. You'll have a playbook. I'd say like start there. Do you want to be at like a big company with an established track record or like a fast-paced growing startup? I think that is really important. And I don't think there's a right answer or a wrong answer for that.
No.
It's just a matter of, I do think there is like a difference in the lifestyle and the mindset though.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. It's not better and it's not worse. Like a guy, I don't know enough about you as to where you land on that continuum, but for me, if I went to a big company with a lot of structure, I wouldn't have lasted. I need to be in that ambiguity. I need to wear multiple hats. I need to kind of drink from the fire hose and trial by fire. That's how I operate. And that's the operating environment I do best in. So, But that's me. That's who I am. That doesn't mean that that's right for you. You know what I mean? And that's part of that self-discovery.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. I'm at the fast-paced startup ambiguity environment right now, and I like it for sure.
Yep.
But I'm also a really formal structure guy as well, like to the point where my wife makes fun of me. So I think I personally am kind of like in the middle on that one.
Josh folds his dirty laundry. That's okay, buddy. Now you talked about telling your story, and that's like, honestly, like a huge part of our program is helping these folks thinking about how they're crafting their story from their time in the military, specifically for a hiring manager for a sales role. How did you tell your story coming out of the Rangers in that first BDR interview that you think like stuck, like worked for you?
Yeah, I think how I did it and how I would recommend, because I got the advice from some mentors, like bring as many tangible metrics as you can. Because like there's varying opinions on like putting enumerations and stack rankings on your resume. I personally love it. Like I look for it when I'm hiring. And I think like in the Army or in any service, you have that. Like if you're an NCO, you get NCOERs. If you're an officer, you get OERs, where they're literally like was number 1 of 9 platoon leader in the organization, was number 1 of 3 platoon sergeant in the company. And as a hiring manager, I love that stuff because it's like it shows tangible metrics that you performed. And then even stuff like, PT score, like my platoon, like achieved a 300 PT score against a 300 scale, like showing tangible metrics that may or may not be directly applicable to the job, but it shows that you and your team performed against a number, and you beat that number. I think that's an important part of it, and kind of like barrier to entry in a lot of ways. I love seeing tangible metrics, so I encourage people to talk about tangible metrics, and then just the intangibles. I think sales specifically, like the daily discipline that it takes to successfully prospect day after day, really transferable from the military. Your discipline in the remote environment, like a lot of companies are fully remote, and I think discipline to like hold yourself accountable in the remote environment really transfers from the military. So that as well, just kind of being willing to put your head down and do the work. So I would say it'd be a combination of like bringing as many tangible metrics as you can with some of the intangibles that'll apply to the role.
Yeah, and the way that we coach them on the intangibles is, it's one thing to say you're resilient. That's like a C. To say you're resilient and give an example, that's like a B. And then to say you're resilient, give an example and explain why you know that's important as a salesperson, that's a good answer. Now you've shown them that you know yourself, you have examples as to why those things are true, and you know why that's going to matter if they hire you.
Yeah, I love it.
Yep. What do you remember from those early days as a BDR? We have obviously a huge part of our audience is BDRs that are listening to this. What do you think they should be focused on if they want to become good and get to that leadership role that you're at?
Yeah. I remember just like a lot of the basics, and that's why why I started there. Like just learning the tech stack. I had no idea what Salesforce was, what Zoom Info was. So learn as much as you can about the tech stack, get comfortable with the tools, and really, really focus on performing. I think a lot of time, and sometimes I would catch myself, it's like you're looking towards that next role, like how can I get there? And one of the leaders at my first companies was like, the best way to prepare for your next role is to crush your current role. So like, number one, make sure you are crushing your quota, being at the top of that leaderboard. Like, the end of the day, that is what's most important. And then from there, being a sponge. Like when I would book meetings, I think I had awesome account executives when I was at SDR. I thought they were great AEs, and I sat on like every demo. So it wasn't a requirement at my company. Some companies I think it is, some it isn't. But I think just like learning the demo skills when you aren't, it's free reps. Like you book that meeting, you're sitting on the call, and you're just listening to the discovery questions. You're listening to them find what's actual pain, what isn't pain, and kind of like tracking those deals, tracking the whole sales cycle. You learn a lot. It's like it's free education because you're like learning from others' successes and failures.
Totally. It's a no-brainer. And to your point, it starts with do your job. Like that's brushing your teeth in the morning. You hit your metrics, but then you've got to, if you want to go do that next role, you got to start learning about it. And the best way to do that is to listen to the people that are successful. And, we used to, when I was at Turbo, we used to make our BDRs join every meeting they set, and then spend 10 minutes with the AE after, and nothing could come out of their mouth except for questions. Why'd you ask this? What did you mean by that? When they said this, how come you said that? Like that's how you're going to learn. It's like you said, it's free reps. It's a no-brainer.
That's awesome. That's good for the AE too, because sometimes you're probably like, man, why did I ask that question?
It's very good for the AE. You don't really understand something until you try to teach it to somebody else. That's my whole belief, big time.
Yeah,
that's how that's how we run our alumni program. We try to get them involved with our new candidates. Even if you're 6 months into a BDR role, it also gives you a lot of confidence because you realize how much you've learned in that short amount of time because of the nature of the job of drinking from a fire hose.
Yeah, 100%.
Now, obviously you made that another shift into a leadership role, not your first one because of your service record, but your first one in sales. Can you talk a little bit about your approach to running a team of reps? Are there carryovers from your leadership roles in the Rangers?
Yeah, 100%. I think I mean, I took a leadership lesson from the Army that's like in the platoon leader handbook, basically. Like, you're responsible for everything your platoon does or fails to do, which I love. And that's like my leadership philosophy at its core. And I believe it as a leader in the civilian sector as well. And it's accountability. Like, I think leadership is accountability when it comes to that. Like, I'm responsible for everything my sales team does or fails to do. Like, I own that metric at the end of the day. So that's a big one. And then for me, like and I think this comes from athletics, which transferred into military, which also transfers into civilian life, is just like being willing to do the work yourself, like getting in the trenches. Like, when you're a captain of a sports team and you aren't working out with the team, it's like preposterous. Like, in the military, be in the trenches with your guys, be willing to do that. And then I think like in the civilian sector in sales, like obviously you aren't doing all the things that your reps are doing, but being willing to hop on calls, get involved in deals, and still like keep the claws sharp when it comes to that. I think like leading by example is something that has really transferred. I try to do it every day, and it's transferred from the military and sports.
Carry the water bottles. My dad coached high school hockey for 27 years. I'll never forget when I was 12 and kind of old enough to be paying attention to what was going on. I started noticing, because he would let me and my brother skate at their practices. I started noticing that the seniors were the ones who picked up the pucks before the Zamboni came on.
Yeah.
And I asked my dad, like, how come the seniors are picking up the pucks? Why don't the freshmen and eighth graders pick up the pucks? And he's like, they're the leaders. They need to show the rest of the team like what good looks like. Awesome. And that stuck with me literally my whole life, especially when I was running sales teams. You can't ask people to do something that you're not willing to do.
Yeah, I love it.
That's awesome. This is so good. All right, man. Thank you for giving us your time. We got 2 more questions. If we asked you to highlight one of the skills that's made you elite in sales, what do you think it would be? What's that number 1 skill for you?
I think for my career, like the humility. I think I'm always willing to learn. I kind of showed it, like I said in the beginning of my career. I was willing to take that step back to take multiple steps forward. And I think it served me well in the day to day as well. Just being humble, like you don't have all the answers. If you're the smartest guy in the room, you're in the wrong room type mindset. And always trying to grow. And then just the willingness to kind of lead from the front as well. I'd say those are kind of like the two things that have led to my success.
Love it. So we have like our own internal operating language at Shift Group when we talk about candidates and we talk about leaders and everything. We say when someone's like really operating at a high level, we like to say that this guy's dialed in or this girl's dialed in. And most athletes and veterans, it's one of the reasons we focus on that population. I don't have to explain what being dialed in means or what it looks like, but we always like to ask our guests, how would you describe a sales professional that is dialed in?
I love that. Yeah. I would say like fully owning their territory as a business. Like they know the ins and outs of it. They treat every part of their job like in a professional way, like from prospecting to demoing to pipeline and account management. You're the captain, like you're the captain of JRville. Like you own everything in that territory. You're dialed in. You know the ins and outs. That's what I would say.
I love it. Franchise ownership, man. That's what we used to call it. Yeah. And that professionalism is key. It's like, here's the reality that I think people take for granted. You chose a career that you can make as much money as a professional athlete, literally. But think about what it takes to make that type of money as a professional athlete. That's what it takes to make that type of money as a professional salesperson. So to not approach it that way, you're leaving money on the table.
Yeah, I love it.
Awesome. Dude, great conversation, Josh. Yeah. Thank you so much, man. I'm really excited. This is hashtag required listening for our special operators, because I need them to hear from more folks like you to understand like what the opportunity is, but what it takes to get there. So thank you so much. This is amazing.
Absolutely. This was a treat for me. Absolute pleasure. I love the mission. And yeah, would love to chat again sometime.
Awesome. Thank you.
This wraps up this episode of Merchants of Change. If you enjoyed this episode, the most meaningful way to say thanks is to submit a review wherever you listen to podcasts. If you're interested in working with us, please come find us at www.shiftgroup.io.